Hi, I'm Mike Brofman, and welcome to another episode of Song and Wine, Brooklyn Art Song Society's series where we discuss our upcoming concerts over a bottle of wine. I'm joined today by the soprano Amy Owens. She is performing on Friday, January 3rd at the third installment of Home, which is also the first concert of the year of our Lord 2020. And that concert features songs and piano works by Frédéric Chopin and Karl Szymanowski, two Polish composers. And Amy will be performing the quite incredible feat of coloratura, singing songs of the Fairy Tale Princess, and I'll be joining her at the piano. Before we go any further, I want to thank our wine sponsors, Waterfront Wines. They are located at 360 Furman Street in Brooklyn Heights. They specialize in organic and all-natural wines, and they have provided us this red today, which we are going to take a sip of now.
Cheers.
Cheers. That's good.
Very good.
So let's dive right in. Szymanowski is a composer who I think is great, but probably not as well known as, well, certainly not as well known as Chopin. Mm-hmm. So this might be the first time people are hearing any of his music. So if you were to describe this piece in Szymanowski's style to someone who's never heard it before, how would you try to entice them to come to this concert?
Well, the first time I heard a recording of these pieces, I was totally blown away. I was sort of swept into this sound world, which was so mystical. It's songs of a fairy tale princess, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that the imagery, both in the poetry and in the painting of that poetry with the harmonies and the rhythms, gives this mystical world that evokes the moon and the ocean and the wind and birds. The nightingale is a theme that I've come across a lot when in different repertoire when it's talking about like mystical themes. And so in a way it reminds me of some of these Russian composers like Stravinsky. His Le Rossignol has these high sort of floaty bird-like sounds, and the Szymanowski is a lot of these high floaty ethereal sounds, and then suddenly it'll have a dance rhythm like maybe Tchaikovsky-esque. And so in the world of sound that I get through these pieces, I feel dancing, I feel melancholy, and I really feel the magic thing happening because he's shifting, and it's just beautiful. And the way that he writes for this really high voice, it's just otherworldly, and I am totally in that world.
For me, Szymanowski, there were two things that I learned in studying these pieces that informed my thinking about his music a lot. The first was that he traveled the world, and that he was grew up in rural Poland, but ended up going to Persia and to Africa and all over Europe, and the sort of worldliness and the sort of
exoticism, that makes
is very,
sense.
very important in his music, and things, even when they're not evoking any particular culture, it always sounds kind of exotic and otherworldly, I think is the word you used.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important to him. The other thing that I learned, that specifically when he wrote this piece, he was at home during World War I because he had some kind of injury, so he couldn't fight, even though he wanted to fight. And so while he was at home and no one else was around, there was nothing to do because everyone was at war, he basically sat around and sort of self-taught himself philosophy.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And just sat around reading all the major philosophers. And the philosopher, so that also ties into the sort of mysticism and this
Yeah, it makes sense because how the poetry is evoking like larger metaphorical themes, which fairy tales do for us. They teach us lessons. Yeah.
And then the other thing is that the philosopher that he most admired was Nietzsche, and especially Nietzsche's concept of the Dionysian, which is basically this sort of concept that art should sort of basically get you drunk. And I think the music to me, like, it sounds intoxicating.
It's definitely intoxicating.
And it makes you, and it just kind of is drunk. Like the sense of timing, it's so goopy with rubato, retards, and fermatas, every measure. And it's just sort of like, and just the harmonies, which are always like these things like augmented chords and whole tone scales, these things that like never quite resolve, have this kind of like drunk, like off kilter feeling, which I think is really, it draws you in. It's great. And that's my favorite. And I think that it's especially good for this series.
It works with this, but it's, for me, more than drunk, it's the dreamlike thing where we're shifting between realities and it doesn't quite make sense, but it does because you're the one dreaming it. And I think that's how when I'm singing the music, it feels like that. If if there's enough studying to get a sense of what the internal structure is supposed to be and you float over the top, it's like, I'm in this dream state where, I'm shifting between maybe, a jungle and a desert, and it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that musically.
Yeah, and it's in your mind, and it's not quite clear what's real and what's not real. Like in the first song with the moon, that always reminds me, at least thematically, of Schoenberg's Pearl Lunaire.
Absolutely, yeah.
The symbolic thing of the moon. You alluded to it a little bit, but this is my next question. This song cycle, I think the thing that people will hear immediately when they hear it, amongst these other sort of deeper issues, it is very, very high.
It's very high.
It is probably one of the highest written song cycles in the repertoire. And it really takes advantage. It really is for a very specific kind of coloratura soprano that would be comfortable singing Queen of the Night and that fun stuff.
Yeah, but it's so much more lyrical than Queen of the Night, which is why I thought of Stravinsky's Nightingale, because it has these long lines, because it's supposed to be beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, because when you're hearing a high sound that is so beyond the realm of what we're actually hearing in speech on a day-to-day basis, that automatically you're in a different sound world. The resonance of the whole room is in a different place. Yes. And I think that's probably why he wrote them like this. And I am so grateful to be singing these because I love singing up there. And in terms of the actual range, it doesn't go as high as some other song cycles I've sung, but the tessitura, like where it's sitting the whole time, is just floaty, high, very specific intervals. And so my approach to that is, how can I be as crystal clear and clean on these high notes as possible? We don't want a wide vibrato. We want it to sound crystalline, because then you can come into that world and like vibrate with it. And let it be beautiful and soaring. And then you can also hear all those intervals and be caught up in that, strange space of harmonic shifting.
Yeah. I think to me, like the highness of it, that I think about is, I always think of high notes, because I'm not a singer, so I'm not thinking technically, and I always think of, and high notes are, to me, are a function of structure in a work, where by definition in every bel canto aria ever written, the climax of
the high note,
the
cadenza.
There's the joke of in all these competitions, they read the newspaper until the high A, and then they look up, and then they go back to reading the newspaper. That's they call it the money note, right? And so we're sort of pre-trained to hear a certain emotional intensity associated with high notes. So when you do everything all that high, it creates this like next level of emotional intensity. In certain places, and sometimes it's supposed to be crystalline, but I feel like it makes the emotion of it focused in a different way to me. So this is my third topic of discussion, which I'm not segueing to very eloquently, but that's okay. We can edit it out. As well as being an amazing singer, you are also a conductor. And I think this is a very good piece for a singer who is also a conductor, because it's so rhythmically free that there's no way for us to navigate it without some sense of conducting each other. So I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the sort of cross-section between being a singer and a conductor, which is not the most common cross-section in the world.
Yeah, well, to be learning about musical structure mostly in a way that helps me listen better to the details that are happening in the music. It's hugely beneficial for my singing, and vice versa. Understanding singing helps me learn how to conduct and listen in a different way there. But yeah, in the piano part alone, you have many voices going on. You have a melodic line, you have your inner voices, you have a bass line. I mean, managing that on the keyboard is amazing. You do a great job with that. And then on top of that, I'm maybe holding a note, and if I were just counting on my own and not really tuning into where your inner voices are lining up with my internal pulse, we would be all over the place.
Yeah.
And it was so amazing that we came into some of our first rehearsals with this and we were able to navigate it so well, even though it's so complicated, because I think we were just really listening to each other. And that's the thing about studying conducting. It's not about waving arms. It's about initiating a musical idea and responding to what's coming at you. And that's what we do no matter what instrument we're playing.
So if you want an experience that is not completely of your normal world,
yes,
this is a good segue. Home 3, Friday, January 3rd at the Brooklyn Historical Society. It is Amy Owens, soprano. Yes. Laura Strickling is the other soprano, performing songs by Chopin, which are lovely. There will also be a lot of solo piano music on this particular program. Miori Sugiyama is performing some Chopin mazurkas as well as accompanying Laura. The great pianist Spencer Meyer is going to be performing a solo work by Szymanowski, Matope, which is actually written in a very close together with our work.
Yeah.
And we will be performing songs of the Fairy Tale Princess, which I'm not going to say in Polish. Tickets are available now, and you can buy them in the link that is right there, I believe, in that little box. And until next time, see you at the concerts.
See you then.